All right, could you put Make Me New back up there for a second? It was 2 songs ago. This is a song I forgot existed until about 5 minutes ago when Tyler led it. And I thought to myself, if I had remembered this song at the beginning of the series, we would have sung this every time. This is the Spiritual Disciplines series in a slide right here. And I hope you realize as you were singing these words, you were actually asking a prayer of God as to what you'd like for Him to do. And I love these words. It seems in so many ways I'm not enough like you. And that's the whole drive behind these disciplines that we've been talking about, is try to be more like Jesus. So I hope that as you look at these words, that you can kind of echo these in your mind, that this is what you want from this too. You can go back to the sermon now. I thought that was too good not to mention. Now, I changed I kind of had a little leeway with this. I used so much space with all the songs and things this morning in the bulletin, I did not have room to put tonight's title, and so I changed it after Friday, because Friday was a bit of an adventure for me. I haven't even told my wife about this yet. I was in my garage changing my daughter-in-law's oil and rotating her tires, and everything was going fairly smoothly. It's a new car to me. I've not done the oil on there before, but it was actually going fine. I didn't mess anything up. I had at one point, I think, 3 tires off of the car, and I was walking back around my garage to the back side of the car toward the other tire, and I caught the edge of my storm shelter door there in the garage. And I I was moving ahead and not wanting to move ahead, and I stumbled, and I was going toward a garage wall that, ironically enough, has windows on it, like leaning against the wall windows. And I was picturing myself like head through glass as I was going in slow motion, and I could not regain my footing for anything, and I finally caught myself right at the wall. Left foot still hurts right now. Someone asked me earlier if I felt 51, because that's what I turned this week. After Friday, I did. I probably felt about 71 after Friday. No offense if you're 71, but so as I thought about the title I had in mind originally, I stumbled across this. And usually when we think of stumbling blocks, we tend to think of things that other people put out in front of us that get in our way. And I think sometimes we have the tendency to do that to ourselves, don't we? I mean, that garage storm shelter door has been in the same place since they installed it in December of 2018. I know where it's at. And yet, because I'm so caught up in other things, my mind is somewhere else, and I'm not paying attention, I catch it, and I very easily could have found myself up here in a cast this morning or on a crutch like Reed was this morning. We have those moments where we have things that get out in front of us that we're not aware of. And part of why we've been talking on Sunday evenings about these threats to spiritual living is sometimes we don't recognize them until we run into them. And so I hope that we can call our attention to them a little bit. Tonight, we're going to kind of wrap this up. We will almost be done with spiritual disciplines. There will be one more thing coming next Sunday evening. Jet and I will have one of our conversations. He's out of town this week, so couldn't do it. But other than that, we'll be done at least with my explanation, but I hope you're not done with it. I hope these are things that you will look at and realize of the several, I think 12 that we've talked about during the last several weeks, that I don't anticipate any of us will be great at all 12. If you are, you can preach the next series on this a few years down the road. But I think for most of us, we're going to be doing pretty good to get good at 3 or 4 or 5 of those. And honestly, if there's none of them that are a part of our lives now, even 1 or 2 would make us a little more like Jesus, make us new more so than we were before. So tonight, I want to start with a question. Are we disciples or are we Christians? And I wrestled with this idea a little bit, largely because of terminology and the things that we say. I didn't hear a whole lot about being a disciple in my early church life, and maybe you didn't either. If you know your church restoration movement history, you know there was a time where the disciples of Christ and the Church of Christ kind of split and went in different directions, so it's almost a bad word in our minds sometimes in that sense. But when we look biblically, it seems like there's a lot more talk about disciples than there is about Christians. In his book, The Spirit of the Disciplines, Willard explains it this way. When Jesus walked among humankind, there was a certain simplicity to being his disciple. Primarily, it meant to go with him in an attitude of study, obedience, and imitation. There were no correspondence courses. One knew what to do and what it would cost. So when you went to follow Jesus, you just understood that was, you're being his disciple. That's what you do. And that was language they used a lot within their culture. We don't probably quite as much within our culture, and yet biblically, if we think about the times these words are used in the New Testament, Christian is not really used all that much. The word disciple is used 269 times in the New Testament, which is a lot. I mean, if you start thinking about the different words and the frequency of those words, this is a pretty significant word within the New Testament. And yet at the same time, the word Christian is used 3 times. And 2 of those 3, I believe it's other groups trying to talk about Christians to delineate who they are as opposed to the Jews. There's one time Peter uses it in 1 Peter, and we'll look at that later, where it's actually describing the group from themselves. But they would view themselves as disciples probably more than they would as Christians. Now, I don't think you have to be in agreement on this. I don't expect you to start referring to yourself as disciples tomorrow instead of Christians. But part of what saying Christian as much as we do, as opposed to disciple or church member, if you want to think of it in that way, or however you may go about it, is it defines differently within our minds. A Christian is almost like an identifier. And I know we think there are things that go with that, but when you think of disciple, there's a lot of activity involved. There's a lot of changing of who we are. There's a lot of making us new, as we sung about. And so for us, I want us to think in terms tonight of being disciples and what that might mean. Rich Villodas, I referenced his book this morning, The Deeply Formed Life. He said, I don't believe that God is interested in transforming some parts of us and leaving the rest untouched. Scripture does not show him calling us to split life into sacred and non-sacred categories. And don't we talk in these kind of terms? I mean, the very fact that the series has been called Spiritual Living should tell us something. We have this tendency to think of, well, there's this, our regular life, our work life, our family life, and then there's the Christian life, the spiritual life, and those are different things. God doesn't seem to talk in those terms. When I reflect on the New Testament, I see how Jesus has redeemed the entire world and calls our lives to reflect this good news by seeing God shape every aspect of our lives. And maybe that's the follow-up question to, are we disciples or are we Christians? Is God shaping every aspect of our lives? Now, I think God stands willing and ready to do that, but sometimes I don't know that we invite that from God. I think sometimes we want to have this piece of life that God is handling and doing something in, and this other piece of life that's kind of our own thing. We would never say it out loud. We'd never think of it in those terms. But yet we see a lot of people who claim to follow Christ that's kind of what life looks like. So again, are we disciples or are we Christians? So let's look at the words of Jesus. Jesus is soon to be ascending into heaven here at the end of Matthew, and he says this, Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I commanded you, and behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. So within the Great Commission, as we know it, you have these things going on. First of all, you're going to go. There's an activity involved. You don't just sit still. You don't just wait. You're going to go. And then the thing you're going to do when you go is not convert, which language, not baptize yet. We're getting there. But we're going to make disciples. These are people that are seeing the things that we teach, that are the things that Jesus taught, and then they are going to bring those things into their own lives and then go make disciples themselves, because that's what disciples do. It's an ongoing thing. And then we're baptizing them. And then I believe a description of disciples. We are teaching them to observe, teaching them to keep, teaching them to follow these commandments. So there are things that we have learned from God, from Scripture, from Jesus and his example, and we are then teaching those things to others so that they can do them too. And when we do all of these things, he is with us always. As we talked about this morning in our worship time, the presence of God. God is here with us. We don't always see it. We don't always recognize him, and yet we know that he's here. So in 1 Peter chapter 4, and we're going to lead to that one time where Peter talks about Christians. Starting in verse 8. These are kind of commands, guidelines, things that he tells believers to do. He says in verse 8, above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. So your primary thing here is you're going to keep loving one another because love fixes a whole lot of problems. In verse 9, he says, show hospitality to one another without grumbling. And I love the qualifier because we're pretty good at hospitality, I think, most of the time. We're good at being hospitable at one time or another. But every now and then when you're being hospitable, do you find yourself kind of grumbling about it a little bit? I shouldn't have to be here doing this thing. They ought to take care of it, or somebody else ought to be. And you just get kind of grumbly about it. So show hospitality, but no grumbling. As each has received a gift, not if you have received a gift, as each has received a gift. And we all are at different places with this. I have, for some reason, I got on the Zillow mailing list here in Ada at some point, the email list. And so almost every day, and probably multiple times a day, if a new house has come up for sale, and I'm not looking at all, but if a new house has come up for sale, I'll get a little link to it. And I find myself just out of curiosity looking at some of these houses. Sometimes I'll see the name of the street, and I think to myself, I wonder what a house on that street goes for these days. And what I have learned looking at these emails is any kind of house you can imagine you can find in Ada. There are houses that you would walk into and it would frighten you, and you would think, I don't know if the floor is going to give if I walk too far. There are other houses that seem too pristine for you to be there, and you need to take your shoes off, and everything in between. And each of those people who are selling those houses have lived in them and have been gifted by that at some point along the way. We each have things that we are gifted with ability-wise, things that we have provided with in life. We are gifted in different ways. So as we have received, which shows us that we will all do this at different levels than others. And there will be those of you who, as we've gone through the disciplines, meditation really clicked in your mind. And there are those of you that think that is the last thing in the world I would want to do. And there are those of you who feel like, Scripture is something I want to get more into. And there are others of you that think prayer. We all have these different things that draw us in. As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as stewards of God's varied grace. So as you've been gifted, use it to serve. Verse 11, whoever speaks as one who speaks oracles of God, whoever serves as one who serves by the strength that God supplies, in order that in everything God may be glorified through Jesus Christ, to him belong glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. So in the verses we just read, Peter tells us, love earnestly. Love, it's going to cover sins, it's going to do great things. Love in a very real kind of way. Show hospitality. So be good to other people. They're going to be good to you somewhere along the way. But regardless of that, you're supposed to be good and do kindness. Be good stewards. You have been given something. And even though it may not seem like a lot for you, and you may think, well, I wish there were more, whatever it is you have been blessed with, be good stewards of that. Speak God's word. We talked about the oracles of God here. Be familiar with God's word and be able to speak those things. And then fifth, in everything, and I feel like when he says everything, he's talking about the things in this list and everything else. So whatever it is, glorify God. Now, I don't know about you, but when I look at this list of things, not all of these come naturally to me. Honestly, I wonder sometimes if any of these come naturally to me. I feel like these are things where there is some effort involved. And so I wonder, do we think these things are just going to happen? Do we think that I'm just going to naturally be loving in a very honest and full kind of way? Do we think that I'm always going to do the hospitable thing and do it without grumbling? Do we think those kinds of things of ourselves, or do we think we're going to have to do something to lead us in that direction? Are we just going to wake up one day if you're none of those things on the list? Do you think you will wake up tomorrow having heard this unbelievable sermon, and suddenly tomorrow everything will be different? Everything will have changed for you. And if it has, please let me know. That would make my day. But if it has, that would be very unusual. Generally, it's going to take something a little more than that. So do we think these things will just happen? And then after going very positive here at the beginning of this chapter, Peter gets kind of negative. In verse 12, he says, "Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you." It's not just trial, but fiery trial. Do not be surprised when these awful things begin to happen, like that's unusual for you. In verse 13, he says, "Rejoice insofar as you share Christ's sufferings, that you may also rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed." So when you share in suffering, and not just suffering, by the way, because we tend to think of this in terms of, if I can say it this way, almost inconvenience in our world today. Isn't that what suffering becomes? I am amazed at the things people will complain about until I realize I complain about some of the same things. And then I'm just kind of sad with myself about it. Christ's sufferings. And think about what his sufferings were. I mean, we remembered them this morning in the Lord's Supper. He gave his life. He was beaten. He was spit upon. People tried to entrap him. His sufferings were a pretty serious kind of suffering. Insofar as you share those sufferings, rejoice. And then verse 14, If you are insulted for the name of Christ, you are blessed. And I will tell you, I watch Christians insulted as a group or sometimes individually because of Christ pretty regularly in the world in which we live. You see a lot of it online. You see a lot of it on TV news or different places, and you will see just the idea of what we believe in being insulted. And generally speaking, the response, what I see on the face of the person across from whoever is doing the insulting, doesn't look like blessed to me. And I will tell you, for me, when people do that to me or about Christianity, I don't know that blessed is the first thing that comes to my mind. There are any number of things that I think, this is just wrong and unjust or whatever it may be, but if you're insulted, you're blessed. So in these verses, these negative verses, he tells us, don't be surprised by trials. You know, when we go along and things are the way they are, it should not shock us. When the world around us, which is the world, I mean, God talks about it quite a bit in Scripture of what the world is and what we are, when it's not like us, doesn't hold our same values, we shouldn't be shocked by that. When things are difficult for us, we shouldn't be surprised. Secondly, rejoice in sufferings. Probably the weirdest little phrase you could possibly think of, and yet the way Peter lines it out for us is that there is a reason that we can do this. And then third, consider insults a blessing. Because who are you like when you are being insulted because of your life following the Father? You're more like Jesus, as we sang about in that song a little while ago. Make us new. Help us to be more like Him. We are, as we are insulted, being blessed by that. Do we think those things will just happen? And I'm going to tell you, if you think the list of positive things is difficult to kind of get going, having this attitude about the negative things, at least to me, is even more difficult. I can be hospitable to people who are nice and kind. I can try to be loving and get that right at least some of the time. But my attitude when things are going wrong, when people are unkind, it's hard for me to switch that in the right direction. And so for all of these things that Peter has made it pretty clear we are supposed to do and supposed to change how we see, if they're not going to just happen, how do we get there? In verse 14, he finishes that verse about being insulted for the name of Christ. He says, because the Spirit of glory and God rests upon you. So how can you have this kind of attitude? It's the power of the Spirit, not your own. It's the Spirit of God that rests upon you. In verse 16, he says, yet if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in that name. So again, because the Spirit is resting upon us, then when we suffer, we can glorify God because the Spirit is there with us. And then in verse 19, he says, therefore let those who suffer according to God's will entrust their souls to a faithful Creator while doing good. So within these verses, once we understand that the Spirit is there, he says the Spirit rests on you. The Spirit is, and we will learn in other places in Scripture, not just resting on you, but the Spirit is within you, and the fruit of the Spirit comes out from you. Secondly, glorify God in the name of Christianity. So instead of striking back, pushing back all the time when we're insulted or when we're maligned or when there are trials, can we glorify God in the name of Christ instead of trying to always push back and make sure that we are treated the way we want to be treated? And then third, trust God in all of this while doing good things. And you'll notice that he has this ending of that verse about doing good things after we have been insulted and after we have suffered, continue to do good things. And again, who does that sound like? Is that not Jesus throughout his life here on earth, that as people mistreated him, he continued to do good things? As people just wanted something from him or were threatened by him, he continued to do good things. So what holds us back? And that's been the point of Sunday evenings as we've gone along. What holds us back from doing these things? Or to ask this a different way, to keep with the title, what are our greatest stumbling blocks to spiritual living? What are the things that get in our way? And I think our tendency is to put this all on the world. Well, it's because the world is such a mess and everything is going so out of control, and those are the reasons. I believe we actually tend to put a lot of these things in front of ourselves. We have a lot of those garage shelter doors that we know are there, and we find ourselves just flailing around as we miss it. We tend to make ourselves stumble sometimes. So on Sunday evenings, we've looked at these over the last couple months now. We looked back on July 4th at independence. We feel like we have rights, we feel like we're independent, and we forget in the midst of all of that that we're supposed to be dependent on God. We're supposed to know that the things that are important in this life, the things that matter, they come from Him. And then we talked about apathy. Some folks just have the idea that I just got to do the bare minimum. Whatever I've got to do to get by, and we get these things in our mind like, there are other religious groups that once you go through whatever the process of salvation is within that group, you are good from that point on, and you don't have to do anything else. And in Churches of Christ, we have hugely raised the bar by saying, well, you should really come to church on Sunday. Or for the crowd here tonight, you should really come to church on Sunday night, or for the group on Wednesday night, same thing. And yet there's a little more to it than that. I didn't look up, we had 269 uses of disciple, 3 of Christian. I didn't look up how many occurrences there were of apostles sitting in a worship service on a pew looking at the back of the head in front of them. I don't think any, but anyhow. We've put a lot of weight on that, which is a good thing. Don't get me wrong. I'm glad you're here. But there's more than that. So sometimes apathy says, well, if I just show up, that's really all that matters, and I don't have to worry about the rest of it. Greed. Sometimes we struggle with the idea of giving or being hospitable because we want to keep more for ourselves. And interestingly, in the world in which we live, this is one of those places where the world is kind of at both ends of the spectrum. There are some very greedy people within our world, but at the same time, there are some very generous people within our world. I'm amazed the number of times I'll see somebody on one of those Ada Facebook groups want help with something or need food or whatever it may be, and people start saying, tell me your address and I'll make a Walmart order for you, and things like that are not, these people are not connected. I have no idea if these are church-going people or not. There are just some people out there that put greed aside and try to do good for others, which as Christians challenges us to do it just that much more. So greed, envy. Envy gets in our way a lot of we see the life other people have, and we want to live that way, do those things. And then pride. This attitude of, I nearly fall flat on my face on my garage floor, and I don't tell anybody about it until Sunday, and when I tell all of you, which is weird, but anyhow. There are things about us that we just feel like, I've got all this under control, I don't need any help. I can, as you learned when you were a toddler, I can do it myself, and then you never let go of that. Until at some point you realize you need help, and you find yourself begging for something, or falling before God. These are the ones we've talked about, which are major things along the way. But I feel like it really comes down to 2 big things. First of all, this is difficult. And understand here, it's more difficult than doing nothing, which makes it difficult by nature. Now, not everything we have talked about in the disciplines is a difficult thing to do. If you think of things you currently do that involve 15 to 30 minutes of your time every day, there are a lot of those things that are not difficult. If, like me, you sit down at 6:30 and watch Wheel of Fortune, because I've been an old soul for a very long time, there's no difficulty there. If I replace that half hour with something else, like any of the things we've talked about over the last few months, I would guess that half hour would probably be better spent, as much as I like solving the puzzles and all of those things. So there's a difficulty there's going to be a little more commitment, but it's not necessarily difficult. Now, sometimes there's a difficulty for us, especially in Churches of Christ, because they're new things. When I talked about meditation several weeks ago now, I'll tell you, I sat in my office for a couple days thinking, do I really want to preach this one? Do I really want to answer questions about it? We're not talking about Eastern religions or things like, can we just skip this one and move on to the next thing? Some of them are difficult because it forces us to expand our mind a little bit. And some of them are difficult because they really are just difficult. Fasting is not natural. Fasting it's going against all of the appetites you have physically. And yet, is it something that's valuable? Jesus seems to think it is. He talks about it quite a bit. He practices it in very large ways. So there are some of these that are difficult for various reasons, but they are still worthwhile. And then secondly, and I think probably the biggest one for all of us, is fear. It is, what if I can't do it? It is, what if I do it? What if I sing those words, make me new, and he actually does? And then the new life that I have been given is more difficult. Maybe these two tie together in some way. But I'm afraid of what comes of this. Or maybe you've tried to read the Bible before and you've started off well, and then you found yourself kind of tapering off, and you're fearful of, I don't want to fail at that again. Or maybe it's fearful of, you're comfortable, and this kind of plays back into apathy too, but you're comfortable with how things are, and I don't really want to change that up. And so we're fearful for any number of reasons. Now, in reality, what we should be fearful of is everything we just read from 1 Peter. We are supposed to be people who are doing all of these positive, good things, people who see these negative things and mentally are able to see a positive side of them. And all of that is in kind of a command language to us. But we're not fearful about getting those things wrong. We're fearful about doing these things that we're not doing now. We're fearful we might miss out on something else with the time we're spending. We're fearful in lots of ways. And yet throughout Scripture, we see the message over and over and over and over again. Do not fear. In Isaiah chapter 43, one of my favorite do not fears in all of Scripture, Isaiah 43, starting in verse 1, he says, "Now says the Lord, he who created you, O Jacob, he who formed you, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine." Now, I know context of this. I know Isaiah is talking to Israel here, but I believe these are words of God that we see echoed in lots of other places in Scripture that are also you and I. That we can know that He's our Creator and He called us by name. "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers. I will be with you, and through the rivers they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior." Whatever we are fearful of, His message for us tonight and every night is do not fear. I guarantee you, if you try any one or all 12 of those disciplines over the next months or years, and some of them click and some of them don't, and maybe there's one that comes out of that you realize this is something I need to do every day, your life, your walk with Christ will be better then than it is now. And it might be great now. You might be in a really good place right now. But if you are doing some of those things more, you will find yourself growing and being better because of it. Back to Velotis's book, he asks a few good questions that I really like, and I just wanted to show them to you. How can it be that those who call themselves Christians live at such a destructive pace that eliminates any semblance of abiding with Jesus in prayer? You ever considered your life might be at a destructive pace? I was reading in another book a couple weeks ago, and the way the author put it was dangerous tired. That you are just so completely spent that there's nothing left all of the time. And Jesus had days like that. And He's God, and He had days like that. And what we see Him doing, and we've referenced it a few times on Wednesday evenings over the summer, is He took time away alone and He prayed. He understood that there was a thing He needed to do to be able to get through that. So if your pace is too much, and maybe that's the reason in your mind for you can't do some of these things, that is exactly the reason you should do some of these things. You cannot sustain that pace. And so why do we live in that way? A second question. How could it be that those who believe that God became a human lack serious integration when it comes to our bodies and our spirituality? Which is basically to say, why do we separate the physical and the spiritual so much? When we see God came here to earth and spiritual life was clearly a big part of what He did, why do we try to separate the two out? And a third question, and this might be the one that's the hardest to hear. How is it that those called to be the very presence of Jesus in the world live indistinguishably from the world? So how are we who, and again, are we Christians or are we disciples? How are we who are both of those things so hard to distinguish from the rest of the world around us? And I think it's we have bought into the wrong value system. And I know with a group like this, there will be those of you, this is a big struggle, and there will be those of you that you look at the things of the world and you get that it's a mess and you're trying to live differently. But this is a struggle for a lot of people who are trying to follow Jesus. Why is it that we live in a way that looks so the same as the rest of the world? And if we look different in a loving, hospitable way, as Peter talked about, would that draw more people to Him? Would we be that light on the hill that He talks about in Matthew 5 so that people would want to know more about Him? Another quote, and then we'll come to a close. These questions are a clarion call reminding us that it is certainly possible to be deeply committed to identifying with the external trappings of Christianity. And that's all to say, it's one thing to be committed to the idea of being a Christian. It's another thing to be committed to being a disciple of Christ. while still living lives that are radically incongruent with the life in the kingdom. They tell us that it is certainly possible to be deeply committed to identifying with a shallow form of Christianity, but not to be deeply formed by Christ. And there are everywhere people who are this. This is the description. They're in a church directory somewhere. They would identify with that. When their obituary is printed somewhere along the way after they're gone, it will talk about how they were a member of whatever church for so many years, and people at that church will say, I don't remember that person. Who is that? Or there are those of us who maybe are here all the time, and we believe these things, but they don't work their way into our lives the way that they should. And if you are not that, then I'm not talking to you. But I guarantee you know people who are that, and people who struggle with the idea of making this more of who they are. So to be deeply formed by Christ is what we're trying to do. And again, I love the song that came up. That's who we want to be. We want to be made new for Jesus. So in Luke chapter 6, he describes this in this way. Can a blind man lead a blind man? Will they not both fall into a pit? That is what someone who just wears the name of Christian without any of the things that come with that and being a disciple, if you are trying to follow that lifestyle, we both just end up in a pit. There's nothing of depth there. And then in verse 40, he says, the disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone, when he is fully trained, will be like his teacher. Will be more like him when fully trained. What is fully trained? What is fully trained in anything? Nathan is a math major over at ECU. He is in calculus this semester, and it makes me shiver just a little bit just thinking about it. I had calculus when I was pre-med long time ago, and it was a struggle, and it was difficult. And I will tell you that if you're in a calculus class, that thing meets 5 days a week because they don't like you. No, it meets 5 days a week because you need it. And if you miss 1 or 2 of those days, you're in trouble, because you got to catch up on the thing from 2 days ago and the thing from a day ago and then today's thing, and it's this constant thing. Why would we think that the most important thing in our lives would be any less? How much bigger, no offense to calculus, but how much bigger is what we're doing here than calculus or anything else that we have spent a lot of time trying to learn? Doesn't mean you can't do calculus. But we are to be people who are doing this within our daily lives, within our daily walk. And we are fully trained, we will be like our teacher. So, a disciple will be like his teacher. What does that look like? I think that's what we've talked about on Sunday mornings for the last 12 or 13 weeks now. When you look at Jesus, I think you will find everything here other than confession, maybe, because Jesus really didn't have much to confess. But I think what you will find about Jesus is, in confession, what we find is openness and relationship and connection, and that Jesus did do. So Jesus was meditating, and he was praying and fasting. He knew Scripture inside and out. He was a good steward of what he had been given and taught other people to do the same. He was always ready to serve. He clearly took moments for silence and solitude, away from crowds and in faraway places up on mountainsides. He was one who had these connections with the people around him. He was one who was willing to guide and also asking for the guidance of the Father. And he clearly valued worship and celebration. When the things of God needed to be known and God needed to be glorified, Jesus was there to do those things. So today, I hope you will see that spiritual disciplines is not just another list of things to do. And most importantly, that spiritual disciplines, the point of them is not the disciplines. It's not about, how many days in a row have you prayed, and it's not about how many chapters of Scripture have you read. It's not about how many days have you gotten away to a silent and alone place. It's about what are those things doing for your relationship with God? How is it changing you? How is it making you new? And so I hope for you that you will connect with some of these disciplines to do that. I hope you will realize that it will make us better people, and by nature of making us better people, it'll make us a better church. We will be people who are showing the light of Jesus to those around us. Tonight, if you have never followed him, you can begin that walk tonight. And I hope we've been realistic with you that it's not always easy, and there are times where it's just flat out difficult, but it is very worthwhile. Or if you have been on that walk, and maybe it's been a little more about just wearing the name of Christian and not as much about being a disciple of Jesus, You can reset that tonight. You can recommit yourself to be his disciple. If there's any way we can help you tonight, please come while we stand and sing.